With a fortune of over $2.5 billion, Jay-Z is the wealthiest music artist in the world. He's also been named by Billboard and Forbes as the greatest rapper of all time, with the most #1 albums of any solo artist in any genre ever.
According to Forbes, Hove is officially the first hip-hop artist to become a billionaire, and it's all thanks to his many business endeavors.
Involved with countless lifestyle companies, media outlets, liquor brands, and even a $400 million music streaming service in his portfolio, he redefined what money, power, and success looks like for celebrities and entertainers, while also earning himself exhibits at museums and libraries for his artistic achievements at the same time. But nowadays, he moves in silence, tweeting, interviewing, and speaking profoundly infrequently, letting mystery take the place of public appearances and musical output. But now the spotlight is back on him. Several recent accusations have painted him in a different light than ever before, not as an icon to look up to, but instead a reminder of the darkness of the entertainment industry and all the ways it exploits its victims. Even before now, though, Jay-Z's carefully constructed narrative of an inspiring rags-to-riches story has begun to unravel. What once looked like a story of entrepreneurial success now reveals itself as a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of wealth, power, and greed. As more unsettling truths emerge, people have started questioning the image of Jay-Z that's been presented over the years. So who really is he? A corrupt and greedy liar? One of the greatest artists of all time? Or maybe something in the middle? In Brooklyn, New York in 1982, a 12-year-old named Shawn Carter shot his older brother in the shoulder for stealing a piece of jewelry from his dresser. Not that he had wanted to, but in that moment, he didn't think he had any other choice. His brother was addicted to crack and had stolen Shawn's ring so he could pawn it for drug money. Understandably, it's a scary situation for any kid in middle school. Many years later, Shawn Carter, then going by Jay-Z, said this: "My brother was dealing with a lot of demons. He was doing a lot of drugs. He was taking stuff from the family, and I was the youngest, but I felt like I needed to protect everybody else." He later explored this moment in the lyrics of a song he would write for his album In My Lifetime Volume 1, his second studio record, which would go on to be certified platinum not long after its release. He apologizes to a number of people in his life, including his brother he shot, saying the lyrics,
"Try to justify this in my young mind, but the adrenaline and my ego hurt combined drove me berserk. Saw the devil in your eyes, high off more than weed. Confused, I just closed my young eyes and squeezed. What a sound, open my eyes just in time to see you stumbling to the ground." Ultimately,
his brother wasn't angry. They even reunited the next day in the hospital, but it's a sign of a bad situation that had happened to begin with. Not only did he have access to guns at the age of 12, but he knew how to use them, and he was even in a situation where he ended up using it against his own family. The Marcy projects that Jay-Z grew up in were known in the 1980s as one of the most dangerous and drug-ridden places in America, at a time when New York as a whole was suffering badly from violence, the crack epidemic, and widespread poverty. People who could leave got out as quickly as they could, and they didn't look back, spreading to surrounding cities and states, and the people who couldn't suffered the consequences. Brooklyn at the time was a landscape full of abandoned buildings, empty lots, and industrial waste, smog, and darkness. A photographic survey from the early 80s paints a dismal, depressing picture of Jay-Z's surroundings as a kid. The house that he and his family lived in until he was 5 years old sat on a block surrounded by empty lots dotted with giant piles of garbage and row homes with the windows busted out and the doors boarded up. New York City wasn't the outrageously expensive home to rich college kids, finance guys, and billionaires that it is now. In fact, when Jay-Z was in middle school, over 2,000 people were murdered every year in New York, about 1,000% more than 2023. New York at the time was dirty, dark, and falling apart. People who lived in the city back then later talked about this era in New York's history by saying things like, "The crumbling sadness was so vast that it seemed the city would never turn around." And this wasn't just affecting the world around Jay-Z. It was a big factor in his life at home as well. The story of him shooting his brother was one of many moments in his early life that set him on the path to become a product of his environment. His father had abandoned him and his 3 older siblings when Jay-Z was 11 years old, which Jay-Z would later describe as a traumatic moment in his life that changed him forever. He later said, "Kids look up to their pop like Superman. Superman just left the crib? That's traumatic. He was a good guy, but he didn't handle the situation well. He handled it so bad that you forget all the good he did. As you can see, I'm a grown man, but it's still here with me. I'd say I changed a lot. I became more guarded. I never wanted to be too attached to anything and get it taken away again. I never wanted to be too happy or mad. And it affected my relationships with women too." But later on, Jay-Z realized that in the type of environment they lived in, even his own father wasn't entirely at fault for the way his life went and the things that happened to him. He later said, "When I was 9 years old, my dad's brother got stabbed, and my dad went looking for the guy who did it. People would call in the middle of the night and tell him, so-and-so is out there. So my dad would get up and go outside to look for the guy. After a while, my mom was like, hey, this is your family now, you can't do that. But this was my dad's baby brother. And so my dad was in so much pain that he started using drugs and became a different person. I understand that the trauma of the event, coupled with the drugs, caused him to lose his soul. The story goes that after his father had left, Jay-Z's mother tried as hard as she could to keep him out of trouble, buying him speakers and boomboxes to listen to his favorite music whenever he wanted, feeling like that was the best way to keep him out of trouble and under her supervision. Knowing what usually happened to kids who went outside without adults around in New York, she wanted to keep him in the house. In school, he was a talented student who scored very high on standardized tests, attending the same school in Brooklyn as Busta Rhymes and Biggie Smalls. But at the same time, the pull of the world outside took hold and started to push him in a dark direction. He later said, I saw a guy get shot when I was 9 years old, and he wasn't even a bad guy. His name was Benny. He was the guy who took us to play baseball. We always believed he could have made it to the major leagues. He was that good. But some guy was chasing him, and then I heard a shot and saw him on the floor. With his mother trying to raise 4 kids on the salary of a bank secretary, it became a struggle to look after and pay attention to all of her children. And Jay-Z later talked about how without a father in his life, the only role models left to look up to were older guys in his neighborhood who made their money selling crack. And at that point, the pull of the streets began to take hold. Many years later, he would be quoted as saying that there was no other way. Surrounded by poverty, addiction, and homelessness in his community, with a broken family and no good future prospects to look forward to, Jay-Z started selling crack when he was 13 years old and dropped out of school by the time he was 16. But the full extent to which he dealt drugs, who he sold them to, and the beliefs he took away from that experience have remained a strange and confusing chapter in Jay-Z's life ever since, defining his character years before he was ever a best-selling rapper, business executive, or record label president. Jay-Z wouldn't officially become Jay-Z until he was 26 years old. Until that point, Shawn Carter spent over a decade, if his stories can be believed, moving crack in large quantities across state lines, getting caught in shootouts, losing friends, and risking his life on a daily basis as he moved product all over the East Coast from New York to Virginia, Maryland, and beyond. This time in his life served as the basis of his creative career and musical storytelling later on, but still to this day, this chapter of Jay-Z's life presents a strange, confusing dynamic when it comes to the reality of Shawn Carter versus the character he plays in public. Later on, talking about how and why he got into drug dealing, he said this: "No one aspires to be a drug dealer. You aspire to the lifestyle you see around you. You see the green BMW, the prettiest car you've ever seen. You see the trappings of drug dealing, and it draws you in." But the actual statistics of the early days of the crack epidemic, right when Jay-Z got involved, are disturbing and sad. Between 1984 and 1989, the homicide rate for black males aged 14 to 24 increased by double. During this period, the black community also experienced a 20 to 100% increase in fetal death rates, low birth weight babies, weapons arrests, and the number of children in foster care. Crack cocaine use and distribution became popular in cities that were in a state of social and economic chaos, such as New York, Los Angeles, and Atlanta, and particularly in their low-income inner neighborhoods with high African American concentrations. As a result of the low skill levels and minimal initial resource required to sell crack, systemic violence flourished as a growing army of young, enthusiastic crack sellers attempt to defend their economic investment. In addition, the number of Americans in prison massively spiked between 1980 and 2000. Basically, crack made life worse for everybody on all sides. Point being, Jay-Z was part of a very dark moment in modern history, and he was one of the very lucky few individuals who got to walk away from it and live a new life after. But Jay-Z has maintained for a long time that his experiences as a teenager shaped him, taught him integrity, and he even said, "I wouldn't want to grow up any other way." He often claimed in the past that dealing drugs gave him a code of honor and integrity that doesn't exist in the music industry, saying things like, "It's tough for people like us to get along with music executives. We're coming from a place where there's integrity, there's honor, there's unwritten rules. Meanwhile, in the music industry, kids inherit stuff from their parents and don't appreciate it. For me, I can think, I'm never going back to not being able to pay my light bill, my stomach growling, or eating cereal at night." And so the image Jay-Z created around his drug dealing has been complicated and oftentimes contradictory. The numbers don't lie. Crack dealers killed their communities, but Jay-Z painting it as honorable work that made him a stronger, more honest person is a controversial idea to say the least. He's even told stories about how he learned financial intelligence from dealing drugs, saying things like, "I learned about budgets and finances from selling crack." When asked if he felt guilty about contributing to a nationwide drug epidemic, he later said, "Not until later on did I realize the effects on my community. In the beginning, I was thinking about improving my situation, buying clothes and cars. Many people have pointed out the strange hypocrisy of Jay-Z's perspective on drug dealing over the years. Most recently, sports writer Jason Whitlock made a controversial series of posts satirically describing Jay-Z's discussions of his dealing in a clearly exaggerated way that still highlights just how strange Jay-Z's comments about drug money making him a better person really were. He tweeted things like, "When Jay-Z sold drugs, he checked IDs and made sure no kids were involved. He didn't sell to parents. He honored a code. He was the honorable drug dealer." He also said, "My understanding is Jay-Z only sold to users over 18. You had to have 2 forms of ID to buy from Jay. A very honorable drug dealer. He would often clasp the hand of a buyer and say a little prayer after completing the deal." These comments were clearly sarcastic, with Jason Whitlock even saying it was a joke after, but it's still a real reminder of the complicated discussion around Jay-Z's life before music. Creating a narrative that selling drugs made you a better person when you were dealing in the middle of a nationwide epidemic that killed hundreds of thousands of people doesn't point to Jay-Z having the greatest self-awareness or morals, but still, that was just the start. And while Jay-Z's philosophies about crack dealing might be questionable, that's not the only reason his past has stayed under scrutiny, even to this day, because many people still can't quite seem to agree on whether or not he ever sold drugs at all. Being a rapper, it's easy to create a character around yourself that may or may not be true at all. Maybe Jay-Z learned about the life of a drug dealer from people around him, but didn't really do it himself. Rick Ross, for example, in reality was a college-educated guy who spent years working as a correctional officer, but he made a huge career out of pretending to be a drug dealer in his music, even stealing his name from an actual real-life infamous drug dealer in LA who later sued him. The scale Jay-Z claims to have sold at over the years, though, is pretty insane. Being a drug dealer isn't just something Jay-Z discussed in interviews, it's a central part of his music.
That scene out of state where I drop my sling. I'm deep in the south, kicking up top game. Bouncing on the highway, switching 4 lanes. Screaming through the sunroof, money ain't a thing. Your worst fear confirmed, me and my fam wrote.
From the Mafia-inspired album covers and aesthetics, to the very first singles to his very first album, his music was always built on gritty, dark stories about him trafficking drugs up and down the East Coast and making huge piles of money while doing it. Being a drug-dealing gangster turned rapper is literally what his career was founded on. But a lot of people have accused Jay-Z of lying about his business over the years. Comedian Faison Love is only one person who went on record and said there's absolutely no way Jay-Z was dealing drugs at the scale he claims.
When Jay-Z creates this whole drug dealer, drug lord, I'm a drug dealer, I'm a drug lord, these kids, and we gotta do it too, to be like Jay-Z. Not knowing that this is all made up shit.
Jay was involved
No.
Hold on.
Not only that, but Faison Love also had strong feelings about the effect Jay-Z's glorifying his past had on people as a result. Of course, that would only be even more sinister if a lot of the stories he tells aren't true at all. Glorifying a life of crime and danger, encouraging people to do the same to make it out of their own situations, only for your story to be untrue, that's dark. The thing is though, the people who knew Jay-Z before the fame, before he dropped Reasonable Doubt, a lot of them tell a much different story than Faison Love. Memphis Bleek is another Brooklyn rapper who also grew up in the Marcy houses, and he knew Jay-Z from a young age, later telling this story from the mid-90s when Jay-Z was not yet famous.
So listen, right, I'm telling Hov I'm fucked up. I need $100. Nigga like, listen, go in my room, in my nightstand. In my top drawer is the hundreds. Yo, Bleak, I know how much money I got, so take 100. That's it. So I'm like, all right, cool, no fucking problem. Let me go upstairs to the room, go to the nightstand, take 100. I open the drawer.
She got $1 million.
A whole stack of hundreds, just the whole drawer full of hundreds. So I'm like, damn, Bleak, why the fuck you ask for 100? Like, what was wrong with you, my nigga? Like, so I'm like, all right, let me take $100 bill. So let me take 100. But then now, you know, I'm downstairs chilling with the shorty, son, in my mind, like, check the other drawers. So I go up there, check hundreds, 50s, 50, every drawer stacked to the top, hundreds and 50s. Then you get to the drawer that just had 20s. And it was like, Bleak again, why you ask for 100?
DeHaven is another person who's gone on record many times over the years to talk about Jay-Z's life in the streets, having first met Jay-Z when they were kids in Brooklyn and later living together in Trenton, New Jersey when they were young adults.
Know me?
Okay. So was he actually on the corner selling?
Yeah, he'd get busy. Yeah, he got busy. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm in New York, he gonna get busy. Nah, you know what I mean? And, you know, and they took into him. He had a nice squad. He had his own little squad that got busy for him. So yeah, he knew how to be a boss.
Well, you and Jay have not spoken in over 20 years.
Right.
Jay walks in the room right now, sits down next to you. What would you tell him?
What would I tell him?
Yeah.
What took so long?
Whether or not Jay-Z being a fake or real drug dealer and glamorizing his fake or real crimes and the harm he did to other people hurting his community is up to interpretation. But in the end, the truth of his stories told by his former friends paints an even darker picture than the story otherwise would have if he had been a liar all along. Basically, he really did that shit. The only reason why this matters at all, though, is because Jay-Z didn't become a statistic. Eventually, he did make it out of the streets and become a best-selling rapper, a record executive, and so on. But that part of his life didn't begin until he was 26 years old. If you're interested in more of my creations, you need to check out Spirit World, my independently owned line of solid silver, hand-painted jewelry. Each piece tells a story and is designed to not just be fashionable and well-made, but most importantly, it carries a reminder of the journey of life and the importance of continuing on no matter what. It really does stand for something. I started this brand completely independently. I design, ship, and fulfill every order, and every penny from our sales goes into being able to make more videos like this. These videos are often not YouTube friendly, and a lot of what I make gets demonetized. However, this channel is the main source of income for my family, and hundreds of hours of work go into every video. So Spirit World is a huge deal for us and allows us to keep making videos that people care about. My current favorite piece that I never take off is The Darkest Night and the Brightest Day, a silver piece of a sun rising over a night full of silver stars. By making these, all I want to do is remind you that the only thing crazier than trying your hardest is never trying at all. It doesn't matter who you are, a rapper, a producer, photographer, student, writer, anything. We all get a new chance to work hard and reach our goals every day. Of course though, Spirit World has all kinds of pieces, including our new pair, Chaos and Harmony, which are the craziest designs I've done yet. Anyway, if you want to grab some really beautiful silver jewelry that's actually really well made and will last for as long as you do, you can go to spiritworld.store and grab a pendant and chain right now. Shipping is always free in the US, and you can use the code Volksgang for a special discount just for watching Volksgeist. And once again, thank you very much for supporting what I do on this channel and helping make sure that the videos keep coming. Years after Jay-Z got famous, his cousin later said, every morning he would wake up and be in the mirror rhyming to himself to hear himself and check his flow. You know how some people get up and do calisthenics every morning? It was like that. But Jay-Z didn't get in front of a mic and put out a song till he was 26 years old. Pretty old for someone who would eventually become one of the biggest rappers alive. Mainly because, again, he was dealing drugs for 10 years before that. The story goes, though, that entire time he spent practicing, preparing, writing, and getting ready to be a rapper. Sitting on the train, driving from state to state, practicing. It was all he did.
So I had to start memorizing these things to take them home, you know, and it became an exercise for me. And every day I'm trying to memorize 8 bars, then 16 bars, and I'm memorizing the whole song. Then I start getting away from the house further and further. So I'd start memorizing longer and longer. You know, my journey back home was getting further and further. It took me from New York to Trenton to Maryland to Virginia, DC, you know, it was getting further and further away from me.
Despite him getting pulled into the world of drug trafficking, music was always his true passion from the very beginning. Even as far back as the late 80s, when he was barely past his teenage years, he can be briefly heard on some recordings from Jazz O, an older rapper from Marcy projects who got a record deal with EMI in the mid-80s and was also the same person who provided the gun that Jay shot his brother with at the age of 12.
Look to my partner Jay, yeah I saw it. Struck the shoulder, said, hey, I can't call it.
But his experiences weren't just limited to people he knew in the Marcy project. He also made a name for himself in New York when he ended up in a few rap battles with LL Cool J in 1992, years before he released any of his own music. But like he said later, being a professional rapper wasn't really a viable life option. It wasn't at all like today when any young kid can find a gimmick, put themselves all over social media, and end up with a small fortune and 1 million followers within a year or two. It wasn't even an issue of gatekeepers controlling who succeeded and who didn't. When Jay-Z was in his early to mid-20s, hip-hop as a business wasn't yet big enough for him to count on it as a viable life option, with a lack of simple ways to distribute your work and get it heard by people, at least not compared to the type of money he was making already. He later said this, I remember the first time I saw Sugar Hill Gang on TV. I was like, what's going on? How did these guys get on TV? Still though, he would later say that music was calling his name, and he knew at the time that he couldn't be in the streets forever and get out with his life, and that trying to make it in music was a better chance than to keep playing with his life in a way that ends well for almost nobody. And so the story goes that eventually Jay-Z found himself in a position where he had to walk away from his lifestyle and start from the very bottom to even have a shot at being able to do what he loved. He's always said that he took the chance to turn his life around, to grow as a person, and to achieve something real. But it was a slow start. After his first single, In My Lifetime, was passed on by a number of radio stations who didn't like his style, and a variety of major labels had no particular interest in what he was making, by 1994, Jay-Z took matters into his own hands and started selling records out of the trunk of his car around Brooklyn. He did sign with an indie label, Payday Records, who saw potential in the song In My Lifetime, but they ended up being a bad fit and weren't able to help push his career forward. In the end, they let him go with a small lump sum payment as a contract payout. That moment was huge for Jay-Z, and in a way, it made the rest of his career possible. Teaming up with two close friends, Biggs Burke and Dame Dash, they took the money from the Payday Records contract and founded an independent record label with a tiny office in one of the rougher parts of Manhattan at the time. Within a few years, Jay-Z's independent record label Rocawear, that he founded with two friends just so they could get his debut album out, massively skyrocketed in size and scope. It only took 3 years before Rocawear entered into a 50-50 partnership with Def Jam, and Jay-Z's career got huge. But once he was really in the music industry and started pursuing bigger and bigger goals, it seems like the integrity and the morals he claimed to have gotten from slinging crack went away, and a greed for money, power, and influence took its place. Jay-Z's debut album, Reasonable Doubt, was moderately successful, peaking at 23 on the Billboard 200. It wasn't a huge hit right out of the gate, but reviews were great, and people who were in the know knew it could be an instant classic. An East Coast hip-hop record, Reasonable Doubt was noted for having mafioso rap themes with lyrics characterized by Stylist magazine as gritty realism. Writer Dream Hampton believed that although rappers had alluded to hustling before, Jay-Z talks about what it can do to a person's inner peace and what it can do to their mind. Jay-Z later said, "The studio was like a psychiatrist's couch for me while recording Reasonable Doubt." Steve Huey described him as a street hustler from the projects who rapped about what he knew, detailing his experiences with disarming honesty. And as time went on, Reasonable Doubt started to be recognized as one of the greatest rap albums ever made, with quotes like this describing its massive influence. Since its initial reception, Reasonable Doubt has received further acclaim from music critics and writers. According to Pitchfork's Ryan Schreiber, it has often been considered one of hip-hop's best albums, while Birchmeier said it was viewed like Nas's Illmatic as a classic hip-hop album by a younger rapper about their street and criminal experiences. Reasonable Doubt transfigured gangster rap into mafioso rap, popularizing the subgenre and the imagery of high-class, expensive lifestyles and tastes in hip-hop, drinking Cristal, driving Lexus automobiles, and living out the plots of films like Scarface or Carlito's Way. In the opinion of Miles Marshall Lewis, Reasonable Doubt was a work that shocked the world. Basically, Jay-Z's early work was really, really good. From the writing to the production to the themes of his stories, he was able to tell tales that appealed to a massive audience and displayed a crazy talent for lyricism at the same time. People really liked Jay-Z. Even in the earliest days of his career, he was seen as a top talent who made great music.
Bone crushers, I keep real close, I got the skill for this. On my back, the flyers closed, looking ill as shit. Transactions illegitimate, cause life is still a bitch. And then you die, but for now, life, close your eyes and feel his dick.
Understandably, Jay-Z's rise to fame after he finally got launched after years of struggle was pretty quick. After Reasonable Doubt, which peaked at number 23 on the Billboard 200, he followed up with In My Lifetime, which peaked at number 3. After that, Hard Knock Life peaked at number 1, and his records never fell again, following that up with 15 number 1 albums in a row. With over a dozen albums, Jay-Z ran the game for years. Multiple retirements, hiatuses, and comebacks, he stayed on top for a long time, releasing arguably 5 classic albums, selling over 140 million records, winning 24 Grammy Awards, the most of any rapper ever, and being the first hip-hop artist to be inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. He did a massive amount of work to bring hip-hop to even bigger audiences than ever before, and he received some great recognition for doing so. He wasn't an R. Kelly or a P. Diddy. People legitimately love Jay-Z's music. Plus, his ability to cross hip-hop with pop earned him some pretty huge chart positions as well. Umbrella with Rihanna, Empire State of Mind, Numb with Linkin Park, Crazy in Love, Neighbors in Paris. Jay-Z wasn't just making classic albums, he dominated the radio for over a decade, having the song of the summer almost every summer for almost 10 years. From Reasonable Doubt in 1996 to 444 in 2017, a lot of people consider Jay-Z one of the greatest active rappers. For a lot of people, he still is one of the best. And the story of Jay-Z as an artist was the ultimate come-up. He represented opportunity, hard work, the American dream. People literally wrote books about how Jay-Z's life and music was the personification of struggle and glory in the American dream. Going from dealing crack in one of the worst neighborhoods in America at the age of 13 to 13 #1 albums, his life was the rags to riches story that a lot of people's motivations and dreams are built on. The persona of a hustler, someone trying to beat the odds and make a name for himself in a cold, unforgiving world, he became an icon that millions of people believed in and took legitimate meaning from. The London Financial Times wrote this in 2021. Jay-Z's majesty derives not from what he has made for himself, famous hip-hop artist Jay-Z, but from what he has provided for others as his lesser-known self, Shawn Carter. Throughout his career, he's defined and redefined what it means to hustle. From selling Class A drugs on the streets of Brooklyn to musical albums via his independently founded record label to staples of rap culture like champagne and streetwear, Jay-Z has harnessed his influence and extends it back to the locals of his own stomping grounds, the Marcy housing projects, as well as to Black America and the wider world. Reaching an unmatched balance between quality and popularity, he made a discography that was ridiculously popular and lyrically good, something that only a few rappers were ever able to do at the level he did. And he was so loved for it that he has a permanent spot in people's minds as one of the best hip-hop artists ever. This is a quote from an article where Billboard named him the greatest rapper of all time. Billboard's reason for placing Jay-Z at the top came down to his overall career success. Maybe there are other rappers who could claim to match Jay-Z, but there are simply none who can match his entire career. His longevity, the breadth of his accomplishments, and what he means for hip-hop from a musical, cultural, financial standpoint for the last 3 decades. That's what makes it so much stranger that the real Jay-Z is someone with so many skeletons in his closet, so many lies and strange actions that make him look more like a corrupt, dark character than someone who can motivate millions to do better. There are a lot of people in the entertainment industry who have secrets come out about them, but it turns out that their true character was already in plain view for a long time. P. Diddy and R. Kelly are 2 amazing examples of musicians who turned out were not good people at all. In fact, they were flat out evil. But a lot of people knew that already for years. Jay-Z, though, might be the only artist who was most idolized and loved for years, only for his actions to tell a much different story than the PR machine around him. Still, though, a lot of what he did couldn't be hidden forever, and as it came out, it started to cloud people's ideas of him beyond repair. In 2017, when he dropped 444 at the age of 50, it was instantly recognized as one of his best albums, one of the best albums of that year overall. Full of heavy, hard-hitting reflections on his flaws, his family, and his mistakes, it went deeper than anyone thought he would after 21 years of rapping. It had some of his best rhymes, some of his best wordplay, and his greatest storytelling, solidifying him as one of the greatest to ever do it. But still, it revealed and brought to light a lot of things that make people see him differently to this day. One of the standout tracks from 444 was the title track, a 4-minute, 44-second song full of introspection and reflections that immediately became one of the most highly regarded songs Jay-Z had made.
I seen the innocence leave your eyes, I still mourn this death. I apologize for all the stillborns, cause I wasn't present, your body wouldn't accept it. I apologize to all the women whom I toyed with your emotions.
The big story around this project had to do with Beyonce, because not only did Jay-Z become one of the biggest rappers in the game, but he also married the world's biggest pop star in 2008 after dating for more than 7 years. Their collaborations, brands, appearances, and their cult fan base over the years had made them one of the biggest celebrity couples of all time. But in this context, 444 is an apology letter to his wife of 16 years, focusing on the consequences and the guilt of the immaturity and the infidelity he carried out in their relationship over the years, and the different ways that it hurt his wife. It was widely considered one of the highest moments of his career, with the lyrics and storytelling being poignant and hard-hitting. Beyonce also made her own album about this time in her life. Lemonade dived deep into the stress and trauma from her husband's infidelity, with large parts of the record being centered around her struggles with feeling inadequate, insecure, and mistreated in her marriage.
Something don't feel right because it ain't right, especially coming up after midnight. I smell your secrets, and I'm not too perfect to ever feel this worthless. How did it come down to this? Scrolling through your car.
Ultimately, though, Jay-Z and Beyonce didn't divorce. Instead, they made a joint album and did a world tour right after all of this news came out, going to show just how linked and mutually beneficial their careers had become. At the same time, though, the allegedly suspicious origins of their relationship have been a subject of interest for a long time. Many people have observed strange inconsistencies in their stories and an odd relationship dynamic that points to a darker reality than meets the eye on red carpets and in music videos. The story has always been that they met when she was 18 and he was 30, and that they then spent a few years as friends before officially dating when she was 20 and he was 32. Or at least that was the narrative. Instead though, it looks a lot more like Jay-Z actually met Beyonce for the first time when she was 16 and he was 28, with photos of them together when Beyonce was a minor resurfacing over the years. Still though, there are countless more questions around Jay-Z's motivations and his influence on Beyonce's early life. A 30-year-old man dating an 18-year-old girl is never ever normal, especially if they met when the girl was underage. It doesn't matter if they're both famous, it doesn't matter if he waited until she was 20, grooming is bad. A 30-year-old man can exert vastly more influence over a teenager than the teenager even understands. With different levels of emotional development and life experience, that's not good for a kid. If you don't understand what I'm saying, ask yourself, would I catch feelings for a 16-year-old? If the answer isn't clear to you immediately, just click off the video. The fact that Jay-Z met a 16-year-old Beyonce, decided he wanted to go after her, waited a couple of years, and then felt it was totally normal to be dating her, it betrays something really strange about who he is on the inside. A lot of the time when you think about a 30-year-old guy dating an 18-year-old, the thought that comes to mind is something trashy or someone low class or creepy, but ultimately it's not about the person that's doing it. Jay-Z was rich and famous and it's still wrong. 30-year-old man has no real reason to date a teenager. When you have that much more knowledge and experience about adulthood, relationships, and life, it's manipulative and inappropriate to go after someone who doesn't have that. I'm 25 years old. The last time I would have looked at a 16-year-old in a romantic context was when I was 17. The last time I would have dated an 18-year-old is when I was 20 at the most. What kind of person is 30 years old and says, yeah, I want that 18-year-old? Are you serious? And Jay-Z has even rapped about this proudly on songs over the years.
Got a young girl, hope got a young girl. Still not quite 21, so high strung, such a vibrant thing. I introduce myself, hi Miss Thing. You're 19, no, you're lightning in the bottle. I'll give you a ring tomorrow. The scene that follows screams of horror, classic Stephen King novel. Mama don't think you should date someone so advanced in romance, you should just wait.
One of Jay-Z's longtime friends also later said that Jay-Z moved in on her specifically after she broke up with her teenage boyfriend when she was done with high school.
This is how Jay-Z was able to move in, because she was heartbroken. And Jay came in like the snake. Y'all done seen all the activities of this dude being a snake and then still don't want to believe he's a snake.
Even beyond conspiracies or gossip posts, though, Jay-Z and Beyonce's relationship has drawn intense scrutiny over the years, revealing troubling patterns in his character and behavior. Between his admitted infidelity, the known multiple stress-induced miscarriages that Beyonce suffered early in their marriage, the significant age gap when they met, public incidents like the elevator altercation with Beyonce's sister, many view Jay-Z not as a loving husband, but as someone who pursued a very young, impressionable singer and established a controlling, potentially abusive dynamic that persists to this day. There are countless stories that support that claim. In 2005, when Beyonce featured Bun B on her song Check on It, Jay-Z, having no involvement with the production, stepped in and forbid any men from being on the set while Beyonce was shooting the music video, including Bun B himself, even though he was married at the time. Later on, he also stopped Jamaican rapper Shawn Paul from performing his song with Beyonce, even going backstage to cut his mic during a performance at an award show. The entire history and dynamics of Jay-Z and Beyonce's marriage could be a 2-hour documentary on its own, but all in all, it's yet another thing he's done in his career that points to him being a strange, predatory person instead of an inspiring figure. Ultimately, it's pretty clear that Jay-Z took advantage by going after a 16-year-old when he was 28 and has had a ton of control over her throughout most of her career, and that should be critiqued in a societal context, even though it's far too late to do anything about it on a personal level. Still though, it's far from the only example of what I'm talking about.
If it ain't a teen in there, it don't get his attention. Rihanna was a teen, Rosario Dawson, teen, Aaliyah, teen, for a man who was 30, bunch of teens in there. I'm just saying, Foxy Brown, super teen. I can't name you an adult relationship Jay was in.
It also points to a broader pattern in the type of woman Jay-Z was going after back in his early 30s, because Beyonce isn't the only woman around the age of 18 that Jay-Z was linked to in those days. He was first seen with actress Rosario Dawson in 1997 when she was 18 and he was 28, and they dated for about a year. Somehow though, what he did with Beyonce was almost nothing in comparison to his relationship with Foxy Brown, a rapper from Brooklyn who first started getting a ton of attention in the mid-90s for singing and rapping provocatively at the age of 15 or 16. And a lot of her early hits were collabs with Jay-Z, who at the time was in his late 20s. On a song recorded in 1995 when she was 16 years old, she raps, "My sex drive lasts all night like a truck driver, and that's the only line I can even say out loud on YouTube without the video getting flagged." Around this time, Jay-Z was at least 27 or 28 years old, but he was doing duets with her where they were talking about having sex, dating, being in a relationship in very explicit terms. And he has songs with Foxy Brown all over his early albums, from Reasonable Doubt to In My Lifetime and more. That isn't all though. Over the years, various people have commented on the idea that there was something personal going on between Jay-Z and Foxy Brown while she was still underage. But even if Jay-Z's relationship with Foxy Brown was strictly business, that on its own is creepy enough. Jay-Z being close to 30 years old and doing songs with a 16 or 17-year-old girl saying the things that they were saying, it takes a whole other level of personal and moral corruption and greed to go through with that as if it's completely normal just to make a hit song. Why would you ever want to do that?
I was like, my understanding, Foxy got signed at like 15, 16 years old, and the first time I had heard of her was on the Ain't No Nigga record and Outside Looking In, and that's why I had Dame in front of me. I was like, how old was she when y'all was in the studio? Like, was anything going on? And if he would have just said no, I think he was like, oh, I see what you doing. Oh, you funny. Like he was playing it up. But I'm just like, the reason why ain't nobody speaking up, because everybody been condoning this bullshit in hip hop and film and television and sports. There's young teenage girls around grown ass fucking men all the time.
Ultimately though, Foxy Brown's story in the industry had a pretty tragic end. Even if it's not officially confirmed that she had anything to do with Jay-Z on an inappropriate level, the industry clearly took a toll on her life. As she got older, she began to struggle with mental health and legal issues, with her career eventually hitting a wall after her third album in 2001. Her fourth album was canceled when its executive producer, P. Diddy, wouldn't agree on what to do with promotion and production for the project. A few years later, she was sentenced to a year in prison, some of which was spent in solitary confinement, among other legal issues that followed her for a long time. In the mid-2000s, she also went deaf, leaving her unable to record or perform, and after that, her career was never the same again, with very few public appearances in the last 20 years. Whether or not her disappearance from the public eye or legal issues were triggered or made worse by stress and trauma from what she experienced as a kid in entertainment, that's uncertain. But it would certainly make sense as a reflection of just how destabilizing the entertainment industry can be for teenagers who get thrown into the limelight at a young age and influenced by older people around them. And for Foxy Brown, Jay-Z was at the center of that. She has claimed at various times over the years that she either did or didn't have sexual contact with Jay-Z, never saying for sure one way or the other, but in the end, her tragic story is another reminder of the way that the music industry and the people in it exploit young stars. But somehow, this still isn't the only story like that from Jay-Z's past. Aaliyah was a singer from Detroit, often credited as helping redefine contemporary R&B in the 90s, despite only releasing 3 albums before her tragic and untimely death in a plane crash in 2001. After being signed to a major label in 1992, her debut record would later go on to be certified 3 times platinum, with her being called the Princess of R&B and a revolutionary artist. She first got connected to the music industry at a young age thanks to an uncle who was an entertainment lawyer and immediately recognized her talent, introducing her to the person who would be the lead songwriter and executive producer of her debut album, R. Kelly, who at the time was becoming one of the most popular R&B singers in the US. The story goes that it took 8 or 9 months of constant work to make Aaliyah's debut, and during that time they got closer and closer, taking breaks from recording to watch movies and get dinner, and there were even rumors that they were falling in love, with Aaliyah being spotted staying at R. Kelly's house at various times. And then on August 31st, 1994, just a few months after her debut was released, Aaliyah and R. Kelly were secretly married at a hotel in Chicago. But on the day of their wedding, Aaliyah was 15 years old and R. Kelly was 27. Years later, Aaliyah's tour manager revealed that he helped forge documents to make it seem like she was 18, so she could get married. Being highly illegal, the marriage was quickly annulled after Aaliyah's family found out, although many people close to her later said that she was never quite the same after her relationship with R. Kelly. Her boyfriend at the time of her death often said that she refused to discuss her relationship with Kelly and will only say that he was a bad man, explaining that he found it emotionally impossible to watch any interviews with R. Kelly's other victims because of how much it reminded him of Aaliyah's own behaviors. In the years after her brief marriage, she was often villainized in the music industry and even found it difficult to find producers to work with for her later projects. Her manager said later that P. Diddy was the only producer who would work with her after the news about her underage marriage came out. And although they were never officially in a relationship in the public eye, she went on to be seen with Jay-Z in various public settings years later. At the same time though, she was in an official relationship with Damon Dash, Jay-Z's longtime manager and co-founder of Roc-A-Fella Records. She was still with Dash when she passed away, and the story goes that they were planning to get married at the time. Dash later said, 20 years after her death, There hasn't been one day since she's passed that I haven't either heard her name, heard her music, or seen a picture of her. Every single day she's present in my life. The strange thing was though, not long after she passed in 2001, Jay-Z embarked on a world tour and released 2 albums with R. Kelly, and according to Dame Dash, that was the beginning of the end for Roc-A-Fella Records as a whole. This is a quote from an article of an interview with Dame Dash. Dash and Aaliyah met in 2000 and continued to date until the singer's tragic death in 2001. But just a few months after Aaliyah died, R. Kelly and Jay-Z released The Best of Both Worlds, a collaborative album that Dame Dash strongly opposed. If you remember The Best of Both Worlds, you don't see my name on that. I never wanted any part of that, the music mogul explained. Dame Dash said Jay-Z knew about R. Kelly's alleged sexual abuse of young girls, including Aaliyah, but that didn't stop his Roc-A-Fella co-founder from teaming up with a singer. Dash claims he refused to be credited on the album and that he donated his profits to a charity that Aaliyah supported. He said, "I know morally we weren't the same," referring to Jay-Z. So to me, Roc-A-Fella was over. I couldn't fuck with it. It was something to me that I don't want to say was unforgivable, but I couldn't understand it. Whether or not Jay-Z went out and worked with R. Kelly out of bitterness that Aaliyah chose someone else over him, or if he just didn't care at all, is a question that might never get answered. In the end though, knowing that he knew what R. Kelly did, both options paint Jay-Z as an uncaring, even sociopathic person who had no problem choosing profit over doing the right thing. And not long after the release of Jay-Z's 2 joint albums with R. Kelly, Roc-A-Fella essentially split. There were a variety of factors at play, from strained relationships with clients to disagreements between executives, but Dame Dash still maintains to this day that Jay-Z's decision to collaborate with R. Kelly shattered any trust he had in him as a friend or colleague. From rollingout.com, Dash recalls the moment that he confronted Jay-Z about working with R. Kelly, describing a heated exchange that ultimately spelled the end of their empire. "I was like, yo, how are you gonna do a project with a guy that raped my girl?" This raw conversation marked what he calls the nail in the coffin for their partnership. Not long after that incident, all shares of Roc-A-Fella were sold to Def Jam in 2004 for $10 million. At that point, Jay-Z was named the president of Def Jam, and that would somehow turn out to be even more controversial and questionable than what he had done already. Jay-Z spent 3 years as the president of Def Jam, not in an honorary or symbolic position, but actually working in the company. He even announced that he was retiring from music completely to focus on his new role, releasing the Black Album, which many people called one of his best records, as his final project. And Def Jam was doing well when Jay-Z got there. They had artists like Kanye West, DMX, Jeezy, Joe Budden, Ghostface Killah, and more on their roster already. And Jay-Z made a number of ambitious moves while he was with the company, one of the most notable being signing Rihanna in 2005. She quickly became one of the biggest pop stars in the world, releasing 14 #1 songs and becoming one of the highest selling artists of all time when she was still in her early 20s. But how Jay-Z actually signed her in the first place was a strange situation on its own. Rihanna had originally been scouted by a producer visiting her hometown in Barbados and even left her home country to stay with the family of the person who noticed her talent so she could get developed, all at the age of just 16 years old. Within a year, she ended up in front of Jay-Z, and the story goes that he believed in her talent so much that he kept her in his office until 3 a.m., telling her that she could either sign a deal with Def Jam or leave his office through the window, and at the time, the label's office was on the 28th floor. And threatening to throw a 16-year-old girl out of a window if she didn't sign a contract with him was only one example of Jay-Z wielding his record exec power in a way that many people found questionable. Even back when he first took the job, people were writing posts about how Jay-Z's position was nothing but bad news for the company. How does being a rapper qualify someone to run a rap label? It doesn't, and the Jay-Z situation at Def Jam illustrates exactly why rappers should rap and people who know how to run labels should run labels. Let's take a look at a few situations that Jay has messed up horribly as a businessman in just the past 6 months. Basically, people's issues with Jay-Z running a big label came down to him being biased, having his own career and reputation that he was always going to prioritize no matter what, while also having a ton of control over other people's careers. And he stepped on more than a few toes while he was president at the label. Rappers, especially Jay-Z, are fantastic at self-promotion. He didn't get put on by being humble and staying out of the limelight. But as the president of a label, one has to know how to get others into the limelight, and it seems that Jay-Z is completely unwilling to let anyone shine except for himself. Let's go back to this past summer. Jay-Z beef with Crystal, something I chastised him for on this site, but little did I know there was another reason to get on Jay for this. 2 months later, Def Jam released Method Man's album. What on earth was Jay-Z doing putting himself in the spotlight at a time when he should have been pushing a lead single for Method Man and giving him a budget for a video? Method Man is a legend in the game. As a part of Wu-Tang Clan, he helped bring New York hip-hop back, and he was instrumental in changing the sound of the scene at a time when the airwaves were ruled by West Coast funk. Instead of big-upping the legend and putting him on the pedestal he belongs on, Jay-Z essentially ignored the release of his album. Bad business move. A label has to sell albums for all of their artists, not just one. And there were even more examples of artists disagreeing with Jay-Z's leadership at the label. LL Cool J and Cam'ron both vocalized issues with a peer like Jay-Z being put in a position of power above them. but DMX's reaction was probably the strongest. X was one of the biggest rappers in the game at the time, but he ended up leaving Def Jam in 2006 after expressing many times that he didn't trust Jay-Z to have so much power over his career when he himself had his own brand to look after. DMX spoke many times in later years about how he felt Jay-Z tried to eliminate him as competition or blackball him by refusing to release his 6th album, forcing him to leave the label if he wanted his music to see the light of day again. And Joe Budden was another artist that wasn't a fan at all, later saying, "This was the first time that a rapper, our peer, was calling the shots, in charge of DMX's release date and LL Cool J's release date, and none of us took that well." Of course, that's only one of Jay-Z's moves in his music career that people consider a dark mark. There's another incident in 1999 where he was sentenced to 3 years probation for stabbing a record executive who he thought was bootlegging his music. Also around the end of Roc-A-Fella, just before his time at Def Jam, many people felt he had done dirty business against his 2 co-founders when he didn't involve them in negotiations to sell their label to Def Jam. Jay-Z undeniably did make a huge impact in the industry throughout his career, helping launch influential stars like Kanye, Rihanna, J. Cole, and more, but in a lot of ways he left a trail of disappointment and bad business behind him. Artists like Tierra Marie, Cameron, Emil, Beanie Siegel, and many others have all talked about how Jay-Z failed to support them when it was his job to do so, showing favoritism or just ghosting their careers while they were signed to him. While Jay-Z's career as a record executive comes with a long list of achievements, at the same time he also showed many times that he was willing to do whatever it took to push himself forward, even if that meant ruining relationships with people he was responsible for, cutting his longtime partners out of deals, or even worse. But Jay-Z's influence still stretched even beyond the music industry. He also emerged as a powerful voice for social justice, having a big impact on politics at the height of his career. Especially during the tense social climate of the mid and late 2010s, Jay-Z was known for helping pay legal fees and provide support for a number of people who were widely recognized as not being treated fairly by the American justice system. He was a huge supporter of Colin Kaepernick and even turned out a Super Bowl halftime show performance to show support for him. And he also helped 21 Savage avoid deportation from the US. He even reportedly spent millions of dollars helping Meek Mill stay out of prison after an incident where he popped a wheelie on a dirt bike, ended up being a probation violation, and put him behind bars for 6 months. Even more so though, Jay-Z was known for providing representation for people who really needed it, not just rappers and athletes, but people like Jabari Talbot, an 11-year-old kid who was arrested in Florida for not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance in his 6th grade classroom. And that's just one of many examples where Jay-Z used his own money to provide legal support for people facing injustice, even meeting with the governor of Minnesota after George Floyd was killed in 2020. When Barack Obama took office as America's first black president, Jay-Z became a frequent visitor to the White House and a vocal supporter of progressive policies. On October 31st, 2021, Barack Obama himself said this about Jay-Z. "I've turned to Jay-Z's words at different points in my life, whether I was brushing dirt off my shoulder on the campaign trail or sampling his lyrics on the Edmund Pettus Bridge on the 50th anniversary of the Selma March to Montgomery. Today, Jay-Z is one of the most renowned artists in history and an embodiment of the American dream, a dream he has helped make real for other young people like him." When a former president of the US calls you the embodiment of the American dream, that's a whole other level of success, and it shows just how influential Jay-Z became over the years. And realistically, it did a lot for his PR too. By getting involved in giving and helping for people who needed it, he only added to the reputation he had as an artist who represented something real, powerful, and profound. Being someone who started from zero, selling crack in the streets of New York, started rapping, and within a few years was a record executive, and then turning around and spending his own money to help people who need representation, speaking for actual causes, he was an icon of black excellence, someone who could actually make a change in the world and was willing to stand up and do it. With articles like How Jay-Z Became a Civil Rights Champion getting published on major news sites all throughout the 2010s, he became somewhat of a political icon, or at least that's what the official narrative was. Throughout his career though, if you look a little bit closer, a different story also sits in plain view. Despite his work in activism, the charitable giving, the record-breaking discography, the icon status as a living embodiment of the American dream, over time, a darker side of Jay-Z as a person and a businessman became clear, and a lot of people's perception of him has changed. And that side has a greed for money and a lust for power by any means necessary. And the closer you look, it seems to go against a lot of the values people thought he embodied. Even with his career in activism, a loyalty to money and success over values and principles started to show. Having once supported NFL player Colin Kaepernick and his political protest on the field, Jay-Z even criticized the NFL for the way they treated him publicly, But he then went on to sign a deal to help organize Super Bowl halftime shows, which many people felt was hypocritical and self-serving. And that's not even getting into how many people felt like Jay-Z completely betrayed them after he started advocating for black people to gentrify their own hoods. For many people, that feels like the voice of elitism, greed, and inequality. Getting rich and gentrifying your old neighborhood doesn't save it. That's just the same definition of gentrification as it always was, meaning that residents would get displaced as the area gets more attractive for wealthier people who are from out of town to move in. And the issue was, Jay-Z did do that in real life. He owned a small portion of the Brooklyn Nets NBA team for a number of years, and as part of that, he also invested in the construction of a new arena for the team. Attached to that arena development was a plan for 17 new high-rise buildings, some of which are still under construction today. However, it quickly became one of the most controversial building projects in American history, because in order to start building, they didn't build it on top of abandoned lots or vacant buildings, but instead used eminent domain to find space. That's the process of the government taking people's houses and demolishing them to build new stuff on top. In the process of setting up the new arena and the surrounding buildings, hundreds of people from Brooklyn were forced to move from their homes so expensive apartments could be put there instead. Jay-Z, not long after, sold his share of the arena for a $500,000 profit. In the years since, this project has been called a disaster that raised the cost of living in Brooklyn for hundreds of thousands of people without providing any benefits to locals. It's not hard to see that as Jay-Z selling out his own neighborhood for a quick buck, giving into the corporate machine for his own benefit. But even then, that's not the only time Jay-Z has faced controversy for his investments and business interests. Jay-Z was never just a rapper. He might have been one of the greatest rappers around for a long time, with a long list of awards, classic albums, and so on, but even in the early days of his career, he was recognized also as an entrepreneur. I mean, he literally founded his own label that went on to be its own successful company just so he could drop a project. And across his career, he would go on to push the boundaries of what entertainers can do to leverage their fame. Just a few years into his rap career, around the time of his third or fourth album, he and Rockefeller co-founder Dame Dash founded Rocawear, a clothing brand that within 10 years would be sold for more than $200 million. An insane sum for someone who was just 10 years ago selling CDs out of his car. Various sources report an annual revenue for Rocawear of anywhere from $50 million to $600 million when the brand was at its peak. Basically, Rocawear was a pretty iconic brand. In 2011, he also invested a few $1 million into Uber, which over time increased to the point where it made him over $100 million. In 2015, he bought and became the face of Tidal, a music streaming service with a focus on hi-fi sound quality and better pay for artists. Depending on who you ask, Tidal was either a huge success or overall kind of a failure. Even though Jay-Z, Beyonce, and others made their music available exclusively on Tidal for a couple of years, it never really took off with the general public, and they later even got caught faking streams on Beyonce and Kanye albums to make their stats look better. Jay-Z eventually sold Tidal to Twitter founder Jack Dorsey for $300 million, making Jay-Z a ton of money, but not becoming the game-changing company he had promised. In fact, many of the artists who stood with him at the start to endorse it, like Nicki Minaj, later talked about how they never got paid in any way for promoting the app. Still though, in 2019, he became the first hip-hop artist to ever reach billionaire status, with Forbes describing his wealth as a sprawling, diversified financial empire. For a lot of people, this added to Jay-Z's aura. Not only was he someone who could make generation-defining music, coming from a background of selling crack, but he also became a billionaire. It was simply unprecedented. The promises of his music being a mouthpiece for hustlers, it had come true in the biggest way possible. Even Warren Buffett, the legendary investor worth $100 billion, once said, "For a young person growing up, Jay-Z is the guy to learn from." For a lot of people, it represented the power of hard work, the importance of believing in yourself. I remember in 2013, I wanted to be an entrepreneur after listening to Magna Carta Holy Grail and learning more about Jay-Z. For millions of people, he embodied the dream of being self-made. But in the end, for many others, Jay-Z no longer represents the same message he did in the past. For a lot of people, his story now is more about corruption, abuse, greed, and the dark, exploitative reality of the entertainment industry. The stories of how he treated people, the sort of business he did, and what he was willing to do to find success and protect his investments, it paints a different picture than his PR machine has pushed for the last 25 years. And ultimately, in 2024, Jay-Z isn't really seen the same as he used to be. He still does have 30 million monthly listeners on Spotify, people still love his music, and he was just named the greatest rapper ever by multiple outlets last year, but there are a lot more people than ever starting to point out strange hypocrisies in his words and actions over the years. One of the worst ways that Jay-Z's greed has shown over the years is his friendships and networking with some of the most evil people the entertainment industry has ever seen, and that in itself has led to some really serious accusations against him in the past year. In late 2024, when Jay-Z was sued by controversial attorney Tony Busby for assaulting a minor with Diddy 25 years ago, his response was immediate and shockingly upfront for a person who has practically never responded to any other allegation that's been laid against him in the past ever. He said this: "These allegations are so heinous in nature that I implore you to file a criminal complaint, not a civil one. Whoever would commit such a crime against a minor should be locked away. You have made a terrible error in judgment thinking that all celebrities are the same, but I'm not from your world. I'm a young man who made it out of the project of Brooklyn. We don't play these types of games. We have very strict codes and honor. We protect children. You seem to exploit people for personal gain." And Jay-Z's response may or may not turn out to be the truth. The lawsuit against him was immediately made cloudy and controversial when the anonymous accuser admitted her story was full of inconsistencies, but still, the case has not yet been dismissed. Not to say it is or isn't true, it definitely could be, but ultimately you don't even need to prove that he did that particular terrible thing to show that he isn't above other terrible things. Because the key truth that came out of that accusation wasn't that he did or didn't assault a minor, but instead that he was close friends with P. Diddy, one of the biggest monsters to ever work in the entertainment world. But you don't need a lawsuit to reveal that, because it was never a secret to begin with. And not long after the lawsuit came out, Jay-Z's legal team said this: "Mr. Carter has nothing to do with Mr. Combs. They knew each other professionally for some years, just like in all professions people know each other. At the music awards, they support each other. If you go to the NBA All-Star game, they support each other. That's just how professions work. There is no closer association between any of them." But that part is just a lie. Diddy and Jay-Z had been friends for a very long time. Both coming up as big industry figures in the 90s and reaching similar levels of success, they've collaborated on music, charity events, concerts, and they've even called each other brothers in the past. A few years ago, they were seen together at a black billionaire brunch where Diddy made an infamous toast as Jay-Z stood next to him. It's hard to imagine that Jay-Z never knew at any point in all of his interactions with Diddy across those decades that something was wrong, especially while literally the entire general public knew about his monstrous behavior when it was still just rumors. And that's why it ultimately doesn't really matter if Jay-Z was part of Diddy's crimes or not. The idea alone that he might know who Diddy really was and was still happy to stand by Diddy for photos and events and have brunches and call him a brother, that in itself is bad enough. But it's not like he hasn't done this before. Working with Foxy Brown and making sexually explicit music with her when she wasn't even old enough to drive, going on tour with R. Kelly knowing he abused his ex-girlfriend, selling out his own hometown to property developers for a quick buck, leaving his co-founders out to dry when he sold his record label. You don't have to look at theories about him being involved with Diddy to see that he's already guilty of that same sin anyway. And that sin is ultimately greed. Getting to the level that Jay-Z reached requires you to be willing to do anything, whether it's screwing over other artists, threatening kids, stabbing another man in the stomach over a record, doing a world tour and collab album with his ex-girlfriend's abuser, not paying co-founders like Nicki Minaj for promotion on his app, writing the business partners who made his career out of the company. Jay-Z's path is one that he started on 40 years ago when he was dealing crack to his own neighbors so he could buy luxury cars and jewelry. But ultimately, pointing out that Jay-Z is a controversial person is a lot harder than it is for P. Diddy or R. Kelly or anyone else, because he has done a lot. For those guys, the evil was always obvious. They were bad at hiding it. Everyone could tell. Jay-Z gets a lot more credit for being vastly better at making music and creating narratives, but ultimately, he still has that greed in common with them. It's easy to look at Diddy and Jay-Z and all of their mutual friends like Oprah and everybody else and feel like there's a conspiracy around them being in cahoots with each other. And that might be true, but ultimately what brings them all together is the love of money. They're an example of what happens when you're willing to do literally anything to push yourself forward. And so in the end, he isn't that different from someone like Diddy, who even before being arrested had an insane reputation of hurting, exploiting, and using everyone he worked with. Jay-Z is just much better at making music and creating narratives. But again, the truth is, it's simply a fact that in order to get anywhere near the level of fame and money that these people have achieved, you have to be ready and willing to do what Jay-Z did, and what Diddy did, or anybody else like them. And what they did is simple. They betrayed any sense of moral responsibility to be good towards others so they could get ahead. Jay-Z is no different than anyone else. There is no billionaire worth praising. But again, it's hard to completely condemn Jay-Z. He helped many people get out of prison, he has the cosign from Obama, and most of all, he's made a ton of music that people actually love. Jay-Z's public profile doesn't have a completely black and white bad legacy, and that's what makes it more complicated than just seeing an out-and-out monster when you look at someone like Diddy. He knows how to do enough good to look good enough. Still though, in a world where people like Diddy and R. Kelly and Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein and so many others are finally called out for being evil in private while they parade their success to the world, Jay-Z isn't far off from being right next to them. Unless, of course, he is literally right next to them. It's ultimately a classic example of separating art from the artist. You can listen to Jay-Z's music, a lot of the great music he made, and you can take away something from it for yourself. Because music can be a good source of motivation or a story, but you don't need to idolize the person behind it. You can appreciate the artistry while acknowledging someone's flaws. Jay-Z was once a kid from Brooklyn, hungry to make a name for himself and get out of his situation in life. He wanted to get something, and he got it. And then he got more, and more, and then more, until the person he became didn't have much in common with who he used to be, or really anyone else, as he became more and more elite and attached himself more to the capitalist system. But ultimately, Jay-Z's story is a reminder of human nature itself, because greed is a corrupting force that can turn even the best intentioned people into monsters. Plus, the reality of Jay-Z's character and life is bad enough without adding theories about the Illuminati or secret sex trafficking into the mix. And look, that stuff might be true too, but in the end, everything he's done in public is pretty serious anyway. All we can do as normal people who will never be billionaires, will never be A-listers, we can remember that these celebrities and entertainers are not our leaders, they're not our gods. They're always imperfect, sometimes evil individuals acting in their own best interest the same way we do in our own lives. If you're interested in more of my creations, you need to check out Spirit World, my independently owned line of solid silver, hand-painted jewelry. Each piece tells a story and is designed to not just be fashionable and well-made, but most importantly, it carries a reminder of the journey of life and the importance of continuing on no matter what. It really does stand for something. I started this brand completely independently. I design, ship, and fulfill every order, and every penny from our sales goes into being able to make more videos like this. These videos are often not YouTube friendly, and a lot of what I make gets demonetized. However, this channel is the main source of income for my family, and hundreds of hours of work go into every video. So Spirit World is a huge deal for us and allows us to keep making videos that people care about. My current favorite piece that I never take off is the darkest night and the brightest day, a silver piece of a sun rising over a night full of silver stars. It's a reminder to persist and reach your goals, and you can wear it every day. For me, it reminds me that the only thing crazier than focusing on my goals is sitting around doing nothing, because the morning always comes, and you have to keep moving. By making these, all I want to do is remind you that the only thing crazier than trying your hardest is never trying at all. It doesn't matter who you are, a rapper, a producer, photographer, student, writer, anything. We all get a new chance to work hard and reach our goals every day. Of course though, Spirit World has all kinds of pieces, including our new pair, Chaos and Harmony, which are the craziest designs I've done yet. Anyway, if you want to grab some really beautiful silver jewelry that's actually really well made and will last for as long as you do, you can go to spiritworld.store and grab a pendant and chain right now. Shipping is always free in the US, and you can use the code Volksgang for a special discount just for watching Volksgeist. And once again, thank you very much for supporting what I do on this channel and helping make sure that the videos keep coming.